I think we can start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the online research and policy webinars on African development, urbanization, and sustainability. The webinar series, jointly organized by FEM, Fondazione, Enrico, Mattei, and the Master Design for Development, Architecture, Urban Planning, and Heritage in the Global South. A master program promoted by the Politecnico of Milan, Poliedra, and the Department of Architecture and Urban Study, DAStU. Let me introduce myself. I'm Enrico, Research Fellow at FEM within the research group Facts, Firms and Cities Towards Sustainability. Well, this webinar is the last one of a series that we started 3 months ago, and that is completely devoted to the themes of urban geography and sustainability in the African continent. You can also find the recordings of the past webinars on our YouTube channel. But today we will talk of urban circularity in Africa with two remarkable guests. Differently from the previous webinars, I leave the presentation of the themes and of the agenda to Marta Marini. Let me briefly introduce her. Marta is a graduating student from the Design for Development Master, the study program with which we are organizing this webinar series. She has spent the last few months here at FEM doing a research internship on the topic of urban circularity with a special focus on African cities. She has also worked intensively to organize this event, selecting and inviting our speakers, and deepening her and our knowledge on the themes that we are going to address today. So Marta, thank you again for your work, and feel free to start whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Enrico, for your presentation. Good morning to everyone. I'm Marta Marini, and thank you for joining us today. We are going to start with a brief introduction and then of this webinar, last webinar, and then a brief instruction about the organization of this event. So, circular cities are an actual and urgent topic, particularly in African continent, where transformation and urbanization are exponentially increasing. Now, due to the pandemic emergency too, is this the time to intervene in order to enhance administration policies and the livability of urban agglomeration. And today we are going to discuss if and how this concept of circularity and also resilient and more general sustainability find place in African cities. And we have two guests that we thank them for their availability in order to provide a double perspective on a broader topic of urban circularity and resilient cities. The first speaker is Catherine Kalisa, urban planner with a background of civil engineering. Since 2016, she is working with the UN Habitat as a national technical advisor for Rwanda, and where she is providing technical support for the Ministry of Infrastructure in charge of urbanization and human settlement. The second speaker is Christian Benimana, architect and senior principal and managing director of Mass Design Group in Rwanda. Mass is a non-profit architecture design collective mainly focused on projects with the goal of improving health. Christian is also the co-founder of the African Design Center, a field-based apprenticeship with the mission to empower the leaders who will design a more equitable and sustainable world. Their presentation will be moderated by Alice Buoli, and Alessandro Figueira, postdoctoral researcher and adjunct professor at Politecnico Milan. And each presentation will last about 30 minutes, and then will be followed by a question and answer section of about 15 minutes. You can ask questions typing in the question section that you should see in the top right of your screen on the main menu. And after the presentation, we will have a wrap-up session with both the speakers and followed by some closing remarks by Eugenio Morello, Associate Professor of Politecnico. Now I give the floor to Alice and Alessandro. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Enrico. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here today and to chair this very interesting and rich webinar. Just to remind everybody that we are going to have some questions at the end of each presentation. You can write the questions in the question area, and we will be happy to pass them to our guests. Without further ado, I'm really happy to welcome Catherine Kalisa to give her presentation and to share her screen. So Catherine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please allow me to share my screen? Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'm very happy to be part of this conference today. So my job today will be, I hope you can see my screen. I hope yes.
Yes, very well.
Thank you. My contribution today will be really to focus on UN Habitat contribution towards urban sustainability in the world, but also in Africa. Tackling on, explaining how we are trying to address this complex target or addressing the issues related to urban sustainability. As they said, I'm Catherine Kalisa. I'm working with the UN Habitat. I'm acting Rwanda program manager. Yes, allow me to start now by giving you an overview of UN Habitat. I know all of you, you know very well what is UN Habitat. We are a United Nations organization dealing with human settlement programs. We are mandated by UN General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. We are therefore the focal point for all urbanization and human settlement issues within the UN system. We are present in many countries in the world where in the past 6 years we were present in 90 countries in the world. Our headquarter office is based in Nairobi. We have 4 regional offices, the first of Asia and Pacific based in Fukuoka in Japan, the office of Latin America and Caribbean based in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. We also have the regional office of Arab states in Egypt, Cairo, and the regional office for Africa based in Nairobi within the same premises with the headquarter office. We also have some liaison offices in New York and Brussels. In Africa, we are present in almost 25 countries. Our vision is really to have a better quality of life for all in all urbanizing worlds. Our contribution or our works is really to work with our partners to see how we can build inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities and communities. Our mission being to promote transformative change in cities and human settlement, leaving no one and no place behind. Our support or our contribution to countries is really to support or to support countries on how they can efficiently monitor and report on global agendas, especially on the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and the New Urban Agenda, which is related to habitat agenda, and also to help building the resilience of communities and to respond to specific and different challenges that the cities are facing. And now, how are we really supporting those countries? It's mainly what we do is to shape or to design tools that could be used to address those challenges. Sometimes we normally set norms, principles, standards, or even guidelines. And from those guidelines, we build capacity, or we train national and local government staff or officials on how those tools can be used to improve their situation or to address their challenges. Of course, while designing those tools or while providing those solutions, it's done in, I would say, in systematic way, where there is research and the solutions that are provided are tested, and we have to pilot those solutions in 1 or 2 countries before approving those solutions. Then after trying to promote them globally and in different countries. Of course, the whole process is done in collaboration with the member states, but also with the whole process of validation of different partners, being other organizations, universities, and so on. So, and for the building capacity, we are using a number of a huge range of I would say methodology. We provide online courses. There are some training workshops, online trainings, and so on. And we normally partner with the universities in countries to make sure that even after, when we are no longer working on that project, or if the technical support is no longer available in the country, the university can help to keep training people in the country. We also establish local and regional global urban monitoring mechanism that will allow countries to compare themselves, but also a kind of peer-to-peer exchanges, and where they can keep exchanging best practices globally. We also support urban data collection, analysis, and dissemination, as we all know that, we also support data collection, analysis, and dissemination, as we all know that data is really very key in designing, but also in trying to address all those issues of related to urbanization. And coming back to the main issue now, the key challenges we are facing in Africa specifically, but also we know that even in other low and middle income countries in the world, the key challenges related to building resilience is mainly technical capacity and experience of officials or decision makers to address who are in charge of addressing those urbanization issues, but also the issue of data. There is a limited access to data. Some countries doesn't have data, doesn't know exactly how those data can be provided and so on. But also we don't have to forget that there is also an issue of limited access to financial resources. Coming back to UN Habitat mandate, we are much supporting on reporting on SDG 11, which is making cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. But at the end, we always say that the SDG 11, the Sustainable Development Goal 11, is the cross-cutting indicator, as if we, for example, we know that all other indicators are contributing in a way, being directly or indirectly to the SDG 11, because we know that, for instance, if we are targeting to make cities safe, we know that, for instance, there is a need to tackle first the issue, the indicator 16 on peace and justice. If we are targeting to have a city, an inclusive city, we know that it has to be to deal with for instance, indicator number 1 with no poverty, good health to all. We have gender equality and so on. So in any way, if you start really digging and try to see what can have to be addressed to tackle the SDG 11, you will see that all SDGs indicators has to be well addressed, so that you will be able to report on SDG 11. If you have to provide access to basic services, which mean access to clean water, indicator 6, access to energy, energy, which is energy, access to energy, which is indicator I was trying to see the indicator on energy, but anywho, so being access to energy and access to water and waste management and so on, all those issues are in a way or another also contributing to the achievement of SDG 11. Now, the key guiding document for all programs that we are implementing in countries, including also in African countries, we have the new urban agenda, which is a framework that contributes to the implementation of SDGs. Again, this was a declaration by member countries done in December 2016. It's an action-oriented document that mobilizes member states and the key stakeholders to provide sustainable urban development at the local level. So the implementation of this new urban agenda really support member states in localizing the SDGs or the 2030 agenda in their countries. But especially, as I said, focusing on SDG 11. The other main document that really guides us in all our program is now the strategic plan of UN Habitat. We now have a new one adopted recently during the World Urban Forum in February from Abu Dhabi. The current one, the strategic action plan of 2020-2023, where we are targeting really to have reduced spatial inequality and poverty in communities across the urban and rural areas. Also targeting to enhance shared prosperity in cities and regions, and strengthening climate action and improved urban environment, but also having effective urban crisis prevention and response. We also have some the action plan or the strategy also includes some other social inclusion issues where we, as we are targeting leaving no one behind, to really tackle the inclusivity, we have the human rights, gender, age, and disability aspect that are also well promoted, but also having some cross-cutting and thematic areas on resilience and safety. Now, we have now 5 flagship programs that we are promoting. We have been promoting those flagship programs even before, but now we are focusing mainly on 5 flagship. The first one being on inclusivity and vibrant neighborhoods and communities, where the flagship really target to reduce spatial inequalities in all urban areas. And this flagship target to address challenges related to uneven distribution of basic services, where we are promoting or we are supporting people in informal settlement to make sure that they have access to basic services, being to water supply, to clean water, energy, waste sanitation, and so on, to have also the issue of spatial segregation addressed, and to have access to public space, and making sure that there is clear connectivity between settlement and areas, but also to have the urban spaces well managed. The other flagship program on people-focused smart cities, it's really to see how we can use or take advantage of technology and innovations in tackling or addressing all issues that we have related to urban sustainability, resilience, and green cities. The other flagship program on reuse app resilient settlement for the urban poor, where in line with this the theme of today, where really the idea is to support on how to build resilient cities and how to deal with climate change issues and challenges and all other risks and vulnerability aspects that related to urban areas. Then again, there is this inclusive cities enhancing the positive impact of urban migration, where the focus is mainly on urban areas that the main destination, the destination for all, where the discrimination and exclusion is really out of these cities, and making sure that there is social cohesion in the cities. And for the flagship on sustainable development cities, there are programs or activities that will help cities to report and monitor specifically on SDG indicators. The program will really support in identifying what is the needs, specific needs to countries to report or to implement the SDG indicators, and also to try how can I say, to localize the SDGs so that it will be very easy to report and to monitor those indicators. Also, the idea also being to make sure that the technical, the capacity building is well provided to staff and officials, so that they can report and know exactly what is needed what is needed in what is the capacity, what capacity is needed to address or to monitor and report on SDG indicators per country. Now, coming back to the theme of today on resilient, what is resilient cities, as I would say, a conventional definition of resilience. The resilient cities are cities with ability of any urban system. It's ability of any urban system with inhabitants to maintain continuity through all shocks and stress, while positively adapting and transforming toward sustainability. Of course, urban resilience matters because it's needed to save lives, reduce infrastructure and livelihood losses, but also makes vital saving when we have disaster and when we have all those stress and shocks from the environment. And especially in Africa, it's in Africa or in low-income countries or middle-income countries, it's even very critical as the state of the cities are not really well resilient to all those shocks. And this is mainly related to lack of data. For instance, I will give an example of, let us say, on flooding, where the city will not be able to provide data, knowing that the quantity, or if the rain will be a heavy rain that could, occur flooding or not. So the lack of data and how we not allow to know how to manage or how ready the city we need to be. On circular cities, or what I can simply call green cities, depending on the concept and on the theory, and will be how can a city be able to use resources and waste. How can the waste be managed in a way of how can the waste be recycled, reused, so that they can reduce the waste that is being generated, so that the volume of generated waste could be reduced. The whole process will lead to a sustainable cities or a circular city. On these two concepts, I will just add another concept of smart, sustainable cities, which will be how can we use, how can we take advantage of technology and innovation to address all those issues that I named before. Now how UN Habitat is trying to address those issues, I will just give example of Rwanda, and why, because I guess I'm just working with Rwanda, but noting that these initiatives are also being implemented in different countries, as I said, in the 25 different countries that we are working in Africa. For instance, for Rwanda, we supported in developing the national urbanization policy that was approved in 2015. And now our technical support is mainly to support in implementing the national urbanization policy from central level to local government level. We also developed what we call Rwanda Spatial Development Framework in partnership with the University of Twente in Netherlands and the University of Rwanda, the SGIS department, of course, with the government of Rwanda, represented by the Ministry of Infrastructure. The Rwanda Spatial Development Framework being a tool, first of all, to support the implementation of national urbanization policy, but mainly to integrate the spatial component in the whole planning processes, basically in the district development strategy. We worked with all districts of the country. Rwanda has 30 districts in the country. So we supported really to review the district development strategies and make sure that the spatial component is well integrated. For example, if they are planning to have a health center, to construct a health center, and the spatial component, once integrated in the strategy, will help them to understand where the health center will be implemented, will be constructed, so that maybe it may serve 2 different sectors or even 2 different districts, so that 2 neighboring districts will not have to invest or to plan for a health center, a district health center, while it can be put at, I don't know, in closer to each other, to the other districts, and the fund planned for the fund that could be used for to construct a new health center in the other district may be used for another facility, for instance. So the spatial component really will help decision makers to to decide in how they can use the fund and how they can plan for their facilities or project in the district. We also supported in developing the Rwanda Smart City Master Plan in partnership with the Smart Africa Secretariat, where the idea was to see how as I said, how the innovation and technology can be used to fast track the implementation of the national urbanization policy. We are now also, we keep also supporting in implementing this Smart City Master Plan. We developed also what we call planned city extension in 2 districts of Rwanda, Nyagatare and Rubavu. We were in partnership with University of Rwanda and Gwanzu Planning Institute, where we are promoting to have a master plan that really show a long-term master plan that will show or will allow the district plan ahead how the district or the cities will be growing. We are now we are supporting the city of Kigali on how to tackle on informal settlement issues, where Rwanda really was trying to address informal settlement, but in a scattered manner. So now we are trying to see how we can really suggest a citywide strategy. Shifting on green side or climate change side, we are having a project called Urban Low Emission Development Strategy, which is really to accelerate climate action through promotion of urban low emission development strategies in district. We are partnering with ICRE, local government for sustainability, and we are funded by European Commission. This is a project that is supporting districts on how to mainstream climate change action in their development strategies. Make sure that each district is trying really to mainstream climate change action. Also, with the growing smarter sustainable mobility in East Africa, sorry, for the urban-led, this is a project implemented in Rwanda and South Africa. For the growing smarter in East Africa, it's a project implemented in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, where we are really trying to promote non-motorized transportation to see how we can reduce emissions related to transportation. We're also promoting energy efficient in building. This is also an East African project. There is also a research program around to promote rapid planning initiatives, where we are partnering with a consortium of 10 universities in different countries in Rwanda, in Africa and in Europe. And we also provided what we call a Green City Toolkit, which is also being implemented in other countries, being a tool to really support district officials on how they can design and advise in building a green city to different stakeholders. So other global initiatives may be related to resilience program in Africa. We have the Urban Resilience Program, which is mainly to support local government and their stakeholders to identify shocks and stress, and from then they can now build urban resilience. We have a city resilience tool which is a tool to help or to train local authorities and even central government officials on how to build their capacity to plan actions aimed at reducing risk and building resilience. We also have our City Prosperity Index, which is a UN Habitat tool I would say to measure and to report on policy dialogue and to help decision makers on how to formulate effective policies based on evidence. So there is a number of really initiatives and programs that we are trying to implement in Africa, but also in some other countries in Asia and low income and middle income countries in the world. So I think I will stop here and thank you for your attention. Over.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, Alessandro joined me in this.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
So while we are collecting some reactions or questions from our audience, we would like to maybe break the ice and ask you a couple of questions from our side. I don't know if Alessandro would like to start.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you, Alice. Catherine, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It showed quite an impressive effort in defining both tools and implementation methodology towards sustainable development. But what I want to ask you is, beside this wide range of tools, you briefly mentioned actually the need to localize the agendas. And the tools that you showed actually try to do this kind of thing. But what I'm curious about is what are the challenges that you have faced or that you are facing in this effort of localization? I mean, especially about localizing the agenda, but even about localizing even somehow difficult concepts to be understood, like circularity or resiliency, that are maybe already in somehow related to local cultures, but are not expressed in the same way. So what I'm asking is, what are the challenges that you faced when you try to build these tools, especially in your experience in Rwanda, to make local administrations, local government, but also people aware about these challenges?
Thank you, Alessandro. Yes, of course, challenges are always there, and again, this really depends on countries to countries, and even within Rwanda, city to cities. As I mentioned before, the main challenge is skills capacity of officials dealing with these issues on daily basis. Where the first approach will really to assess the capacity that is available in the city or in the country to see how able they are, what needed skills so that they can be able to address those challenges and even to understand the challenges. So the main so the first issue will be the capacity, but also I don't know if this is the same in other countries. Specifically in Rwanda, the other challenge is the turnover, where you will have, for example, in case you have a long-term project and starting to deal with one staff, and after 1 year you will receive another new staff with different skills, and we have to start again in assisting and so on. So the main challenge we are facing is really that we always need to have a permanent technical assistant based in all districts, which is kind of very heavy to an institution like ours. The idea being really to have those people at district level owning the whole process, and so that even after they will be able to keep scaling up and even training other colleagues in the district. So the main challenge is really the capacity and the turnover at the level of the district. Over.
Thank you so much for this comment. Very, very precious.
Alessandro, if you don't have other remarks for the moment, maybe I can develop a bit.
Sure.
On what you were also discussing, because Catherine made very clear the importance of a multi-dimensional and how to say kaleidoscopic view on sustainability. And in this sense, also in relation to what you mentioned about the activities of UN Habitat, the research activities that you are developing, I was wondering let's say the importance and the relevance of alliances with universities, with research centers, as well as networks of other cities. So I wanted to ask you maybe to develop more, to tell us more about the role and the kind of activities that you are developing with universities. You mentioned some international universities, but also local universities from Rwanda. And so how, and if there is a kind of relationship between the research, policy, design, and the educational dimension in relation to those alliances with the international and local universities.
Yes, thank you, Alice. The partner, we always have partnership with academia and the universities all over the world. We do have some agreement, and the whole idea behind being to have those tools embedded in the courses at the university, where students will help us in the whole process of research, and knowing, I mean, to try having these tools used even with university. And we all know that the whole research, I mean, the work of research is well done at the university level. And also the other idea of partnering with the international university is to try having this tool tested in other countries, so that this will help us to how can I say, to upgrade or to scale up the idea, and also to I would say, I don't see the word in English, anywho, to improve, exactly, to improve the quality of the tool, sorry.
Okay, we have a question from Marta. I don't know if she wanted to ask herself, or if I can proceed and ask myself. Marta Marini, of course, our host.
Hi. Yes, I would like to ask how UN Habitat work when there is a lack of data. If there is UN Habitat offices or agencies that try to mind the gap of the data, or try to promote another agencies or some local organization to provide data.
Thank you. Of course, in some of the situation we are facing that issue of lack of data or adequate or even reliable data. What we normally do, that's what the other project of City Prosperity Index is really supporting. Sometimes we provide another alternative of how this data can be collected, or any other kind of approach that could be used to provide similar data, so that it can serve the purpose, but also we can that's how the localization of SDG indicators is really meaningful. The country, we support the country to see if there are other available data that could be kind of used to serve the same purpose. And also another thing that we always do is to initiate some kind of survey, although we not really help or be as reliable as having a kind of systematic way of providing the data. So we really try to help the country to see how the data could be provided. For now, we are having a project where we are partnering with what they call Rwanda Land Management Use Authority and the National Statistic Institute, where we are supporting in providing data related to land, to being land for agriculture, for housing, and so on. So there is we are providing training to people in charge of collecting those data to see how they can meanwhile design a kind of questionnaire that could be used while they are doing other survey, so they can integrate those kind of questions, and after similar data could be available to address or to be used for any land related issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have maybe time for one, maybe two questions. Let's try with one from the public, from the audience. Sorry. We have a question from Anjali asking, what tools or systems do you put in place in order to ensure that once the projects are complete and handed over, they are properly maintained and in light of the topic being discussed, resilient? Sorry, the question is from Camilla, not from Anjali. I will ask about the Anjali question as well. So we maybe collect the two questions. The second question is about what are the specific initiatives taken towards ensuring gender inclusion in African cities? And do local universities play a role in this? And how effective are these initiatives in being implemented?
Yeah, thank you. For the first question on how to ensure sustainability of projects, UN Habitat, we always promote a participatory approach, which really leads to ownership of the project which will support or which will promote the sustainability where all stakeholders, a range of stakeholders, need to be involved in the whole process of the project, starting by at conceptual level, design level, implementation, and so on, so that after the handover will be really done smoothly. So the key stakeholders for the participatory approach will be the communities, but also to have civil society involved and private sector. So all those, the bodies are really integrated or consulted during the whole process of the implementation. And that is really the key approach or the key solutions that we are promoting in all countries. For instance, I would say for the master plan of Nyagatare and Rubavu, but even for the Rwanda, it's even provided in the law of developing those master plan, where the community has to be involved and even approved by the civil societies, communities, and private sector, they have to participate in a way in the whole process of. So this really ensure the sustainability and the ownership of the project, and they understand that they have to participate in maintaining the project, as they have also participated in the whole process of the project. Now on the question related to gender inclusivity, and I guess also for all other vulnerable groups, this is also another key concern to UN Habitat, and I guess to all other international organizations. And when it comes to Rwanda, it's another thing, as gender is really well promoted in Rwanda. Starting by the design, there are some, as I said in one of my slides, we have some cross-cutting issues or social inclusivity that has to be addressed in all projects. So while designing the project, you already have to show or to mention how those issues will be addressed. The gender inclusivity being one of those issues. So in the design project, how we are designing project, you will need to show how gender-related issues will be addressed, and how we are targeting to involve equally women and men in any given project. So, for instance, if I take one of the activities related, which is common to many of our projects, for instance, if we are providing trainings to being local government officials, we need to make sure that there is the gender equality. We need to make sure that in issues that we are addressing, gender issues related to safety, informal settlement, access to clean water, and so on, the gender really is well tackled. Women and men have equal access to all those facilities or initiatives. Over. I think I tried to respond one.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think we would keep the any additional question for the wrap up at the end of the session, but it's time now to go ahead. And so thank you, Catherine, and we leave the floor now to Christian Benimana. Christian, you can turn on your webcam so that we can see you. I can anticipate that Christian's work is very inspiring. I'm a huge fan, I have to say, of Christian's work. I also always show my students about his firm work, And I think it's very crucial how Christian and his colleagues put back in the discourse about architecture values like beauty, dignity, justice. So I will just leave the floor to him to learn more about his work. Thank you so much, Christian.
Can I get thumbs up if you can see my screen? Or a yes from somebody? Great.
Yes.
All right. Then I'll go in without further ado. So first, I want to put a disclaimer out that I'm no urban issue experts. I can't speak to these topics as eloquently as Catherine. I'm primarily an architect, and I'll try to frame my contribution today through the lens of architecture primarily. But from the kind of like first slide that I'm showing on the screen at the moment, this is a photo of Kigali's growth. Kigali is my hometown, myself and Catherine. I think you can see like how in 20 years, like all these issues we talk about that have become like the characteristics of like African cities are framed in kind of like spatial ways. So issues of urban sprawl, informality, and all these other things that Catherine mentioned that UN Habitat is working with the government of Rwanda and many other governments across the world to try to address as a society would push forward for more inclusive and sustainable urbanization. However, we, from an architect standpoint, like one of the things that we spoke with the organizers of the webinar is to talk about like some of the interesting topic of research we're undertaking and how that ties into how we understand the issues and how some of the solutions are coming up from architecture scale could actually feed into finding solutions that are applicable to urban scales. So today, I'll be talking through a simple lens of climate change and use that as the medium to explain basically like the ill-equipped architectural practice that we have inherited that makes it impossible or difficult to be useful in these conversations around urban planning, responsible urban planning, and therefore address some of these challenges. I will not repeat the information that I assume everybody on this webinar understands. Like, I think the goal set in Paris was very clear, and the interventions that needed to happen were also very clear. The goal is simple. There are two interventions, and they have two different timings that hopefully we can, bring a little bit in front. Otherwise, we are pretty much in a kind of like doomed scenario. So to add the salt to the injury, this graph is taken from the Commonwealth Architect Association report on the state of affairs of the design, engineering, and construction building industry around the world of last year. You see that the region of Africa has, obviously needs to add more, buildings, more floor spaces, and this is a direct correlation from the, population increase. So again, I won't dwell into statistics. I'm sure everybody is now familiar with all of these sort of things, but this just makes the challenge much more bigger, much more difficult to tackle, and it requires us to think differently. And that is what we've been trying to do ever since we started the practice en masse. We founded on this mantra that architecture can never be neutral, that it's either going to help address some of these societal challenges we faced, or it's going to contribute to making things worse than they already are. And for the past 10 years, we've been trying really hard to stay on the part that heals and run as far as we can from the part that is not going to help our community at large to solve these challenges. So of late, this is one of a research interests topic that we've developed, and we want to understand how we as architects, we as a profession can now start, like distance ourselves from this kind of like practice that we've engaged in for the past 150 years, I don't know for how long, that kind of like makes the architecture dialogue not engage with real issues, like, and stays on this like artistic kind of like genius knowledge about transforming spaces and creating inspiring spaces, which is not really, it's not bad per se, but it's incomplete in addressing these challenges. So we wanted to, since the COP25 said that goals and those challenges, like we needed to figure out how we as architects can contribute to this and hopefully help improve the lives of our built environment. So one of the first things that we went to, to understand further in terms of how it concerns us is, how do we meet those goals? When we say we want to reach half of these global emissions by 2030, what are we talking about? Obviously is, the operation emissions of the buildings and the construction of embodied carbon of, what we use with new buildings. And these two combined, make almost 40% of the global emissions, which is a big slice of this pie chart. A lot of work has been done on the operation emissions, so I will not spend a lot of time on that, but I will spend more time talking about how, the challenges and the opportunities that lies into halving the embodied carbon of what goes into construction of new buildings, because as I shown earlier, African cities are poised to see the most growth, but also that it's the area that has seen less investment, if you will, and less so on the African continent, and one that has a huge potential to contribute to the topic of what we are talking about here today, about circularity of what makes these cities in the first place. As Catherine explained, there is this clear definition of circular cities and sustainable cities that I don't think I can cover the whole kind of like subject and breadth of that topic, but I'll stay within the realm of the buildings of the cities. So what does it take to reduce, the current levels by 2030? Obviously we need to go back to passive systems. And as I said before, there's a lot of work that's been done to demonstrate that, our kind of like thirst for air-conditioned spaces all over the world is actually contributing significantly to destroying our planet, and we need to reduce on that and go back to how we're building, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But what's missing is to try to push that into those practices into projects that are deemed, how can I call it, modern, or like a project that matches the aspiration of these new urban environments on the African continent, where we say, oh, we're going to build a 5-star hotel, so it needs to be fully ventilated, central ventilation, so that the guests are very comfortable at all times. Pushing that kind of like use of passive systems into a modern project is what is still lacking. We still see like uptake here and there where somebody builds their own house in a very inspiring ways, but even though the housing as a typology has a chance of getting these solutions to scale, but they solve significant lower operational emissions that you will need to basically to get like the entire market to change for that to happen, as opposed to these massive institutional projects that single-handedly can have an advantage of reducing this in a single project. So this is like ways we've been trying to do that and trying to work with like ministries here in Rwanda and in Liberia to even include these into policy documents that make sure like there's a very simple, clear guideline on how projects like hospitals that we know from like 50 or 60 years ago have become these kind of like conditioned machines that needs to be run as if they are like they're completely insulated in themselves and completely separate from the environment outside, and how that could start reducing and more take advantage of the passive systems, especially if we live in tropical climates, as many of us are lucky to. This is a project we're building in Sierra Leone, sorry, in Liberia, in Monrovia, which is a different climate when it comes to the temperature and humidity like that are very high, but still we know practices that allows us to meet some of these performance targets that make this project function properly without really investing a lot into systems that are hurting the solutions you're providing for the planet. This is a project we're working on in the south of Rwanda, and I'll talk about the reason why I want to talk about this project. But it's 100% off-grid. The entire water systems is designed in a way that it's circular. The water comes from the lake, gets cycled through like the systems of the campus, and then go back to the lake. All the storm water is managed in the same way as well as wastewater. So the reason why we want to use this is because I want to use that example is because like the embodied carbon of the new construction has to be met with not only being achieved through materials and systems you put in place, but also like the people that are able to benefit from it and make those happen. And that's the subject I want to focus the majority of my presentation on. So there's this saying that every mountain needs a valley. And if you think about our urban core as this mountain, the spaces that take less than 20% of our footprint, but consumes more than 50% of, are responsible for more than 50% of these emissions. We often time focuses on, the carpet right next to it, which is the spaces where we get the materials to build the cities from, like the urban surroundings that grow the food that feeds these valleys and these mountains. Sorry, but oftentimes we do not link that up to what the valley is. Like what is this other dimension that can help offset this thirst for the creation of these cities. Now, on this slide, I also want to make another disclaimer, is that it's of my personal opinion that urbanization is not going to stop, especially on the continent of Africa. Densification is proven to be one of the solutions to, adequately provide civic services and other, health services and all this sort of basic needs that our population needs in a more efficient way. So it's like densification and urbanization is not a bad thing per se, but we need to think about them as a piece of a holistic solution to our entire ecosystem. And one place where we see this opportunity to create and maintain this balance is in these valleys. So what would be the valley in a way that we can establish and maintain this balance between emissions and the sequestration? And what would that start to look like when we think about in terms of like built environment? So, there are things we're already doing when we talk about carbon credits. Of course, it's a very elaborate system that looks about, talks about how, we can begin to think about, system restorations, basically like, making sure like all our kind of like watersheds where they're available, they get daylight, because this kind of like rejuvenates the entire ecosystem, because like running water without daylight has proved to be like a disaster for these ecosystems. Urban forest is now a thing that many urban planning and designers experts are exploring, like urban wetlands, which, by the way, Kigali is doing a fantastic job at. If you get to read about Kigali, you would want to know that there's this like really big effort to try to like restore all our wetlands in the city, which is very commendable, by the way. And then we talk about now like how we want to reduce the concrete jungle and have green infrastructure. Talk about how our buildings are obviously use like more passive systems to reduce on their emissions. How we reduce on how much of hardscapes we have around to reduce the temperature and the radiation. Green roofs and all these sort of things. But what else can we do? How much more can we realistically do? So we have this kind of like question is like, how do we create this balance? What other opportunities does the valley present? And in our findings, we're trying to push now to get more into how these ecosystems that are more or less detached from the cities, start also like exploring things like terrestrial sequestration, forest sequestration, that I think many people are very familiar with and could speak to, but also like grassland sequestrations, because not everywhere is going to be, pristine forests that can do that. And all of these present opportunities for us to be able to create even more opportunities to reestablish and maintain this balance that we are talking about. So when we talk about like, marine architecture, landscape architecture, like all sorts of forms of engineering to try to do this, or to create these valleys where we create these opportunities to offset all these carbon emissions that we are talking about in like on the mountain top. Like the 4 points, these 4 points on the slide right now, like summarizes basically the things we need to do in a simple and concise way. So we need to step away from the idea that this entire world belongs to us and our cities are going to continue growing and growing without stop, or where they don't grow, even like the remaining landscapes belong to us and they need to be kind of like changed and adapted to the human way of living. Like we need to be mindful of ecological functions. Our ecological systems are only as healthy if they serve like all the species that they're supposed to support, not just as humans. Obviously, with the advancement in medicine and the majority of the population of the world living longer, we need to figure out like reliable and responsible sources of food for everybody. And then grow our buildings is the topic that I want to focus on a little bit here, because as I said earlier, I'm primarily an architect. So what does that look like? In a region, as you can see, that is not even covered in the majority of tools and instruments that exist to measure how well we're doing in these quests. The challenge, one of the other big challenge before one of these questions comes on later on, is that this means that we have to work extra hard, or do a little bit more to be able to establish this, which is work that we find difficult to get funding for or getting clients to pay us for, because many people don't really understand it. For those who don't know, EPD stands for Environmental Product Declaration. And where we've also found out is that at points, even the areas that are covered by these systems, because a project a product scores very well on this scale, on this tool and instrument, but it's produced in Australia, by the time it gets to Rwanda, the transportation added to it alone will mess up this entire declaration, and we have to start off again. So it basically puts into question like everything that exists for us, and we need to create our own systems that achieves the targets we want. And that's what we did. We've actually tried our best to come up with a system and formulas for calculations. We've mobilized philanthropic capital, which is answering another question that might come later, why we are a not-for-profit organizations, because so that we can mobilize philanthropic capital that allows us to do all of this work that the clients we work with on project will not pay us for. This is an example of a factory of fired clay products in the country. They've done tremendous work already to reduce the amount of emissions their products carry by firing their products with coffee husks, which is like a byproduct of growing coffee. If you don't know, Rwandan coffee is the best coffee in the world. There's no question about that. But this agriculture activity does also generate this byproduct that becomes like the fuel for this factory and helps them reduce these emissions. But as also like Catherine said earlier, is because we also have very progressive environmental policies similar to what she mentioned answering the last question she answered about gender parity and equality policies. But what was missing was to try to understand now, like, how do we put a real measurement on these products, and where are the opportunities to improve these lives? So we had to go through the entire process of establishing this environmental product declaration for these products that we're using on our project, so we can understand where our project stands. And this is a simple diagram that shows basically, the kind of like approach that we've taken across all our projects that we've seen very effective. So the mission kind of like go to the project specific metrics, depending on who you're talking to or who you're dealing with. I think the three most simple metrics everybody understand from an architectural project is budget, time, and quality. And sometimes like the time and quality is even overlooked because people just want to push the project budget to the lowest as it can be. So one of the things that we've done differently is try to change this method in which we achieve this mission, and make sure that we also understand how much economic activity is generating, how much environmental scores we're scoring on these projects, and what are the lessons we are learning as we're doing these projects, but also like how are we helping. So the emotional part is figuring out like the social benefits of having these buildings around in these projects. So some of you might be familiar with these concepts of good, clean, and fair that has been popularized by the food movement and the fashion movement. Slow food and slow fashion, where basically like there've been efforts to try to change the objectives or the outcome of these two industries, and focus more on like questioning where the food is sourced, and who brings it to the table, how was it grown, and how was it processed. And we think like there must be a movement for slow architecture as well. And by that we mean like the architecture has to be good, like it has to be well designed, because we're designing projects all over Sub-Saharan Africa and other undeveloped world. It doesn't mean like they shouldn't be like award-winning projects, and we need to break down this assumption that for us to have award-winning project, you need to spend billions and billions of US dollars, and create this expectation that these resources, limited settings are unable to do this. Obviously it needs to be clean. I think environmental impact is something that is no longer questionable because of effect of climate change is visible to everybody, and there's a general commitment to want to solve these problems. And this is the last one, which is also very important, is like it needs to be fair. And by fair, this is like that marriage I was talking about between like the carbon footprint and the human handprint. Architecture projects are not about the materials that they used, but it's more about the labor that sources, transforms, and installs those materials in a way that creates the architecture. So how can we put emphasis less on a product specification documents that were given by a manufacturer of this product, and question, if it was put together in a way that upholds these ideals of human dignity that we want our societies to embody. And that's what we've done almost on all our projects, making sure like, the footprint of the building is married to the handprint of the people and the labor that makes them possible. And what that has brought us like now to 10 years after we began this practice is to a point where we're convinced that the construction industry and as the professional who make all these things possible and happen now needs to have a firm commitment to change things and do things not as business as usual. So on the left, I'm trying to diagram what the construction elements of a typical building will look like in the city at the moment. And on the right, we're talking about one of our projects, the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, that is trying basically to create that value of, that offsets this carbon emission that business as usual is creating. Of course, we're pushing for also like the next buildings or houses that come and make the city of Kigali to embrace what's on the right. But we can all agree like that's going to be like an ongoing fight for some time before there's like clear uptake. But on the right, what we're trying to advocate for is, creating simpler systems and start deviating away from things that people are used to, things that our labor force is comfortable putting together, things that are associated with what we consider as beautiful or as comfortable or as needs in terms of like building our own houses or building these other large infrastructure projects. And with this, I think we could first create the value to these like large offsets that these hills are creating, but also like engage in a campaign that now even like start pushing down the peak of the mountain slightly lower. And that basically requires us to go back to how we used to build like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, because that is the firm foundation we have at the moment, with the hope that new technologies are going to help us create new materials, new systems that can allow us to meet these targets, but in a way that is less, that includes like less embodied carbon as we put these buildings together. Again, labor is everything. So on this particular project, 98% of this project was sourced within 160 kilometers of the construction site where it is. So this is us trying to create, this valley as deep as we can. One of the things that we also like trying to address, as just said earlier, about creating modern spaces, but meet certain requirements in the code, but using like conventionally elements or materials or processes that haven't really embraced the construction industry. This is Welals, who was making before we worked with him on this project. He was making glazed clay tiles, mugs, and plates. But we figured out, rather than importing ceramic tiles for the kitchen from China or from Turkey or from elsewhere, we would rather work with Welals and scale up his operation so he can produce all the glazed tiles we use in the wet areas of this particular project. This is another example We had the opportunity on this project to work on all the facets of the projects, from master planning all the way to furniture and fixtures. And you explored this opportunity to use vegetable fibers into things like light fixtures and our furnitures. And these cooperatives of average women in the country are the ones who got together and help us think about how we bring this beauty and this material and this this brilliance and vibrancy of these materials into these elements that now constitute like integral parts of these construction spaces. As you can see in the background, the wall is rammed earth with the same earth that we dug out from the site. It's not rendered to avoid utilizing chemical-based paints and all these sort of things. It extends all the way to the furniture, like the backrest of our sofas and the coffee tables, the rugs. Everything is made from simple elements and techniques of things that are normally used for craft objects, like baskets that are aimed for tourist attraction, or these sort of things, but really have a huge potential to create a channel for these easily recyclable, easily reusable materials into like one of these prominent industries. And one that I can confidently say that the waste that comes out of these processes will not be difficult for our ecosystem to digest. 50 or 100 years from now, I don't know when this project is going to stay there. And this is the result. Like, it's very promising. Like, we're projecting that our project is going to be about 2/5 of the global average in embodied carbon of what is created, and we're proud of the value that we have created with this project. We think, if we're to get like carbon credit, we would be able to offset a lot of things that happen in the city of Kigali. Not that I'm encouraging cities to emit as much as they can. Of course, we need to maintain the pressure to figure out how we can also bring down that mountain, but at the same time, we need to, for us to meet those targets that I just mentioned about, we need to be able to do both at the same time. And this is my last slide. Basically, projecting to be carbon positive in 6 years. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christian. It was a very inspiring presentation, as I hope, and I was sure that it would have been. And actually, while we leave some space for questions, I remind anyone in the audience that they can write down their questions in the question form. Maybe we can start with some remarks ourselves. I don't know if Alice has something that she wants to share.
Well, it's just a quick comment more than a question itself. And I think that your presentation and your work at MAST really show the the multidimensional and in a way social role of architecture. So coming back to your early questions and big statements in the beginning of your contribution, I think that we saw in your work really what does it mean to be sustainable in very different ways. So from a social, material, and urban capital perspective. So it was just a short, quick remark on that. And maybe Alessandro wanted to add something.
Yeah, actually, I have a curiosity to ask to Christian. As I have to say that I recognize you the very, very relevant merit to be able to do things differently. I mean, business as usual is definitely very reassuring for any investor or any NGO or international organization working in the country that we are talking about today, but you are really able to show that you can do things in a different way, and in this way you build imaginaries of beauty and justice that people maybe cannot imagine before of your intervention. So my curiosity is about how can you do that? So especially at the beginning, what was the key element of success in convincing your the people giving you these tasks to accept a different way to do things?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and yeah, it's hard. It's very difficult. In the beginning, I guess like what we realized very quickly was that for us to be effective, the architect needs to expand our role. So if we're designing a hospital, we can't do so only through the lens of infrastructure and construction and design. Like we do need actually to engage with deeper topics of healthcare. We need to educate ourselves, and of course, you know, in standard architecture language, and I'm sure urban planning, we have these processes, we have these steps, we talk about them, but oftentimes they are, you know, like a tick on the checklist. You know, we don't possess the means, we don't have the times most of the time to engage with these subjects at a deeper level and question certain things that, you know, oftentimes we catch way downstream into the project, where you know, we content to respond to a design brief because we assume that somebody must have sat somewhere and digested all this information and created this design brief in a way that addresses the issue. What we find most of the time is that it's not the case, and that's why we design projects over and over again that, you know, design-wise and architecturally we can defend and talk about how beautiful they are and all the sort of things that they do really well, but they miss the main point of what that architecture is supposed to serve for that system that is meant for. If it's healthcare, you know, what are the kind of like endemic issues affecting healthcare in Rwanda and in other Sub-Saharan Africa, and how can this particular architectural project contribute to that solution? And the same applies to the comment you just made about, you know, investors and funders and or people, you know, who come with a spreadsheet that needs to make like a very simple, you know, bottom line that they only care about. And how do we provide incentives to show like these are actually things that can create more value for them beyond just the design, sorry, the bottom line on the spreadsheet. So my simple answer to that question, it just requires us to be experts in almost everything.
So thank you. It's very hard task for any architect that is here with us today. I don't know if Alicia has any other question or remark, while from the audience we still are waiting for, or we are a couple probably.
We have a couple of questions. Well,
so one, I can read one and leave the other one to Alicia. One is what role and to what extent does an architect play in the development of, say, social housing, redevelopment of slums, particularly dealing with the crowd living in poor socioeconomic conditions in African context? So it's quite broad question, we can say, but relating to both the upgrading of slums and social housing.
Should I go ahead and respond, or should I get the two questions and respond to them at the same time?
Oh yeah, maybe we can read both in so that you can give an overall answer. The other one is, how do you engage your target community in the design development phase in your typical projects? How do you ensure you engage a well-rounded population of your community in this process? any examples from your experience at MAS. Okay, so I give you the floor for the answers.
Thanks. So I just repeat the questions to make sure that I understand properly and I don't miss anything. So the first question is, how and to what extent do architects, participate in slums upgrading and social housing, especially for crowds living in poor areas in African cities? And the second question is more like, how do we create that engagement with the community, and how do we make sure like it's a well-rounded community?
Yeah.
And I think I'll first give an answer that applies to both of them, and then I'll go and answer each one of them separately. I think the simple answer to both of those questions is that we need to think more of ourselves as the citizens of these communities, and less about our professions and the hats we wear when we are working. Because the moment we approach these issues and problems as experts and specialists in a specific technical field, I think the more we miss to see the real issues that affect these societies, or we recognize them, but we don't see their relevance in the ways we've been taught through, to become these experts to solve these issues. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that it's no secret that, we architects come from an education system that does not prepare us well to deal with these issues. The processes of design and design thinking we are taught do not equip us to learn, to understand, and to provide solutions to complex problems. We can solve complex spatial problems, but we're not equipped to solve complex economic problems or social problems. And we have to do that. We need to do that. The architecture, for it to be good, it needs to do that. And the only way that I know how to do that is to think of ourselves first as citizens, to be citizens first of these communities, to be accepted. I often joke that, even though I'm very serious, that the first step of an architecture project engagement, it should be a ritual of acceptance in that community. You need to be, we need to humble ourselves and request to be accepted as members of those communities and societies. And then we can start thinking about these problems as our problems. The people can engage us as members of these community and societies, and not parachuting with all our brilliance and come up with solutions without asking any other questions, or we ask questions just for the face of it. And now, like, addressing them like one by one. The issues of when we talk about slums and crowds living in slums and upgrading and all these sort of things. I'm not urban designer or urban planner, but I as a resident of a city that is trying to come up with homegrown solutions to address these things, my take is that architects and urban designers and urban planners and engineers, we don't build cities. People build cities. I think what we do is provide an environment and framework and guidelines that allow people to build these cities in an organized way, in a resilient way, so that it can function properly and be efficient. So the result of people be living in slums and living in this way, like, is a way of people just trying to live around improbable conditions for them to lead, to create those good communities, because when they started building, we're not there, we didn't take time, or when we took time to create all these master plans and everything else, we didn't force a system that makes sure like it's followed or it's properly done. So what can we do now? I think what we can do now is to not go in again with like an agenda to upgrade, but help these municipalities think of interventions that will allow these communities to change the trend to which they are building and living in these places of our cities, because only they can do it. For me, the idea that a mega developer is going to come and get all this entire slum and change everything from A to Z, or the municipality is going to get a big run from the World Bank and do this and that and upgrade it. I'm not saying like it's futile, but it's not enough. The appropriate system would be to provide an environment and guidelines and planning that allows a growth trajectory change for the residents of these places in the next few years. And the architect's role in doing that is to understand that the architectural process outcome is not always a building. It needs to be something that is, think about our supply chain systems, like building elements and construction that these people have used to build these buildings, but also like what is acceptable to code and those sort of things. It has to do with like understanding the skills that is available and how we could improve that, or how we can rely on the kind of like labor force that has been the kind of like backbone of propagating this type of like constructions of slums, and how that could be now put to use with good intentions. And on the second one, which is actually a very, very good question, how do you engage with the community and make sure like it's a well-rounded community? I'll answer this question in two ways. The first one is that we also need to get away from the expectation that we can design with communities. It's not a fair expectation of our communities or the communities we work with. Design is the responsibilities of architects and designers, but we must also understand that everyone must have a say to what can be a potential or effective solution. Like that process is very different from the design, because the process of engaging and making sure that every voice is heard and every suggestion, every recommendation, everything is listened to is one that, again, we architects are not trained to well in how to do it. We we need to be better at that. And again, the best way for me to understand how to do that well is to approach it as concerned citizens, and make sure that we can engage with these issues fully without without any preconceived ideas of what we would want to do later or how we want our design to come, without preconceived basically like mindset and ideas of what we expect to come out of that. And then commit to go through like a rigorous design process that makes sure that a lot of these things are taken into account, and those that cannot be taken into account, we have very solid reasons why. I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the comments. I have to say we have a couple of other questions, but I would try to put them together just to have your final comment before we go ahead towards the roundtable. And they both have to do with something related to energy. So they are asking how do you specifically engage with the energy reduction and considering also life cycle assessment when designing. So which are from a methodological point of view, I would say, the way in which you consider the reduction of the embedded energy in the building and then the life cycle assessment when designing.
Again, very, very good question. So very good question. So about reduction of the embodied energy. We don't start with a target set, or we don't start with materials in mind. Our aim at the beginning of the project is to get to the lowest amount possible. And every element that we imagine, every material, every transformation is put through a matrix that weighs it through three main things. One is the provenance, and provenance is much more than just where it's sourced. Provenance just means it weighs, obviously, how far from where it's supposed to be installed. What is it made of? How is it, like, what is the process of transformation to make it happen? And is it the nearest possible we can get all the best kind of like metrics across that? And the second thing that is the second checks and balances has to go through is the skill set that exists or is teachable that can work with that material. So what is the labor force around us like? It doesn't really serve us well to get a material from Germany and fly an entire team from Germany contractors to come and install that material in Rwanda, unless there is a really, really good reason to. Then the other thing that the other checks and balance system that has to go through is, how much economic activity can the presence of this material or system spark in this ecosystem? Are there entrepreneurs in this ecosystem who can become the supplier, the manufacturers, the transformers, the installers of this material? And then obviously the last one is the ecological balance. Are we disturbing anything by introducing this system? We rarely talk about that, but ecologically, we do a lot of things in the building industry that does not make any sense and actually upset the balance in a way that might not seem very perceptive to us, but is very destructive. So we have to be extra careful about how these things are done. And then when we go through all these things and we have like a clear matrix for all our materials and systems and elements, then we can go and pick the ones that we think help us achieve the best on all of these scales. So sometimes, we don't go for the lowest embodied carbon material, not simply because, we don't choose like all like the low embodied carbon materials because some of them do not make sense within the objectives of that particular project, but we need to have a very good reason for that. And then about the life cycle of the materials and ecosystems that goes into our buildings, it's the same thing. It's more like we understand these buildings as systems that are going to outlive us, hopefully and potentially. And that's where, like, if I go back to the first answer I gave to the first question, we now begin to weigh how we create this balance into basically like how do we meet the minimum mandates of the building codes and all those sort of things that allows us to say, like, if we pick the material, it has the potential to last longer. If it can last longer, it's still fireproof. If it's still fireproof, but it lasts like a very short period of time, there is an ecosystem around it, an economic activity that will allow it to be renewed every 3 months or every 10 months or every 2 years or every 5 years. I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christian, for your patience also in answering.
Yes, we have a last question, but maybe this question would be a good kickoff for our final wrap-up session. So I think that we can, of course, thank very much Christian for the both presentation and the contribution and the very insightful discussion with our audience. Maybe we can now ask Catherine and Eugenio Morello to join us for this final moment discussion. And
yes,
while
I'm here. Hello.
Hello. And while we are all coming together, I'm gonna read this last question, which was for both of you, for both Catherine and Christian. And the question is, what you suggest to promote and spread new urban development approaches through planning and architecture education? So it's a question about education and pedagogies related to urban planning and to architecture. And after, I'm leaving now the floor to Eugenio if he wanted to make some remarks, and then we can go on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so I would say that it was a very rich afternoon or morning, depending where you are, or evening even. I really appreciated the mix of the two presentations and the order, because we touched two perspectives, planning and architecture design. And I'm really, because of my background, where I'm architect by background and planner than in the, let's say, in my profession, then I really understand both perspectives. And I really thank Catherine for the very comprehensive overview of the uprunning programs policies that we have within UN Habitat. And I also have to thank Christian for the very inspiring and passionate commitment. So I will not be very long. I will try to, let's say, find out some clues to go back to circular cities, how you address in very different ways circular cities in your speeches. And of course, I think what we have seen today is really responding to in different ways to the very also, let's say, holistic view of the humanitarian agenda, because you touched SDG 11, SDG 12, but also SDG 13 and climate action. So in order to trying to find these clues about circular cities in your presentations, I try to organize some notes while you were talking. And the first topic is about resources. So how we are trying to make our the use of resources in a more efficient way, and I would say not only efficient but wiser. So a bit clever way to make use of resources. And we have different types of resources. While I was listening to you, the first, of course, type of resource is material resources that we have. In order to make cities to become more circular, of course, we have to think about the way we use materials. And that's the first thing, of course, everybody has in mind. And Christian gave really wonderful examples about materials, about ceramic tiles, about furniture, about everything that relates to a better use of local materials. And that's really important and really is changing the way we approach design, but also planning. So in both scales. And I think it was really important to when Christian was showing this graph on additional floor area by region, and that has to do a lot with how much this material impact of urbanization is really relevant. And Africa is really playing a tremendous role nowadays because of the rapid urbanization. But I will go back to this topic of rapid urbanization later. So we have building materials and life cycle assessment, of course, and saying that it has to do also with the issue of entropy. The more we add, as Christian was saying, architecture is never neutral, and I think that's something we have to keep in mind every time we do something about new design, new developments, we are never neutral, and we always have an impact. We of course try to reduce it, but it's never easy to compensate. And so all this new adding, let's say, creates this entropy. So how do we reduce this disorder? It's really challenging, and I don't have big answers on this. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, beside material resources, that you also touched, is about natural resources. So how to make better use of freely available resources like air, sun, water, natural ventilation, daylighting. All this is really for free, and I think what we have to do, we are trying to optimize the use of natural resources. Of course, I think this is something that in architectural design is already very mature. So architects already do it very well, already understand this. Let's say the scale, moving the scale to urban planning and urban design is still a bit challenging. So the experience is not so mature or not easy to implement. So moving the same perspective on life cycle assessment and best use optimization of natural resources into planning is more difficult, of course. And I think that's the challenge, the big challenge of circular cities. So how to really transfer some of these thoughts, some of these principles that are typical now in architectural design to urban planning. But we have also other types of resources beside materials and natural resources. We have also human resources, and I think Catherine was touching a lot this topic when she was talking about how to create capacity building, especially at the local level, how to really engage people also in the design and in planning. Because circularity can only happen if people are engaged and if they are part of the process. So it's not just a design, but it's something that is including all these different dimensions, which are also dynamic and which refer to in people engagement, involvement in this more and more co-creation type of process. So it's not only the architect or the planner that delivers a project, but it's something that it's collectively built. And I think this understanding as of circularity, of sustainability as a process rather than a project is more and more essential. Otherwise, we will fail in any case. So maybe it's not very nice to say, but let's say that people are another type of resource of material of our design process and planning process, which is so crucial. And I think a challenge we are facing, especially in Africa, is to build this local capacity. But I think it's not a matter of like so much about knowledge, but also empowering like local officers, I think, to let's say to be more and more like not only aware, but like having the tools to make some intermediation, to have some power to ask developers to better build, because this is, I think, the challenge. So how to make sure that they have some let's say rules, some checklists, some easy tools to make sure that we build in a better way. And I'm moving to the next point, which is very much related to time and the urgency of all this process, because all the things we said are really interesting, but the challenge now is that we really need to be on time to make things now and in a very rapid time. I think that the picture that Christian was showing about Kigali, about the rapid evolution, is only one example of the tremendous challenge. And then again, the additional floor area scheme about how much is urbanization going on, how rapidly it's going on, is really amazing. And that's something that we have to deal with now, because the new developments that we are building nowadays, that it's continuously building while we are talking, we are adding new stuff. This will stay for long. So maybe it's let's say short time decision that has been taken, but if it's, let's say, if it's not properly designed or properly constructed, it will stay for long. So the impact will stay for decades. And this is something we have to make sure that at least new developments are efficient and are circular as much as possible. So I think that's this issue is very important to lead to transition. So of course we cannot change from 0 to 1 or completely redesign the way we do cities, but of course this transition requires some intermediate step, and I don't have a solution for this, but this is something really urgent to me and really stressful. Yeah, and finally, I think when we think about circular cities, of course, I've touched mostly environmental issues, but as Catherine was also saying, it's also social. It has a strong social dimension. So we don't have to think about circular city as purely environmental sustainability challenge, but it has to do again with gender issue, inclusion, how to make our cities more let's say resilient also in a social way. And I think the example, I really like the metaphor of that Christian was saying about having together footprint, which is the ecological dimension, and handprint in the sense that we include really people, labor, and practices as an opportunity for new job creation, local new job creation, and a local supply chain. I think that's really important. So also just to conclude and going back to I think the challenge of education is that we should we think a bit more out of the box when we do design and planning, and thinking about these our action on Earth on this biosphere to include of course ecological thinking, but also like social practices and how all this industry and the supply chain around city building and architectural design is made of people, and I think that's the way to create this local economy. So I stop here for now, because I think we already said so many interesting things, and yeah, I don't know if you want to again react on this or wrap up shortly.
Yes, I believe we have time for some few final remarks from Catherine and Christian, if you want to react to the points that Eugenio raised, or the issue of education again, that was kind of cross-cutting topic that we mentioned from the very beginning of the webinar.
Can I jump in? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the word, how you summarized very well my contribution and the one from Christian, and how really you link both of them. I will just comment on the definition or the overview of circularity that you provided. I totally agree with you that circularity goes with management of all flows, being human resources, but also all material resources. I really like the way you defined that circularity. And coming back to the question that if I remember well, was a little yes on what would be my suggestion to include in education related to this theme. I would see a kind of emphasize on how to link policy and practical, I would say practical contribution. For instance, as Christian was presenting on how they are dealing with architectural design process, it's not really evident on how to put or I would say implement or design a policy guide or a policy idea on a paper and have up to a concrete design that could be implemented. And if we can have a kind of a guideline or step-by-step on how to really translate the policy idea to a concrete architectural design. Of course, this is not easy, and I think it has to be a kind of dynamic guideline, and that can be contextualized and put in any context, being if you are implementing an informal settlement in any other remote area, being in urban and rural area. I would see really, I would love to see a kind of detailed kind of a module included in the education curriculum. Over.
Is it my turn? Well, I'd be lying that I know exactly what to include in education. If I knew it, I would have done it. But we're trying to figure it out. I think the one thing that I want to differ a little bit in our understanding, and maybe it's how we've been using it, that I find problematic, is this notion of lack of knowledge or capacity transfer, or this type of feeling that we there's a whole lot of like people who lack knowledge in planning and developing cities. I think it's not entirely true. I feel like the majority of our communities now, even like from thousands and years ago when we started, our communities are very clear about what they want and how to get it done. But I think the challenge comes when there is not a conducive environment for that community to be able to thrive. And the simple the simple similarity that I always create is that we have people who are very skilled in playing soccer, but they are playing on an ice hockey field, and they're playing ice hockey, and it doesn't matter how much skills in playing ice hockey you're going to teach them. They might be very good players of ice hockey in the end, but if we live in Rwanda where we don't even have like ice skate rinks, and then how useful is that skill? And of course, we can create artificial ice skate rinks. So we've created one in Dubai, but should we do that as a society? Should we invest in doing that? So like that's the kind of like similarity that I create. And therefore, for me, the biggest thing missing in our educated elite on the continent that is missing is the knowledge to create that environment, the environment that is compatible with these ecosystems, the environment that is compatible with our cultural practices, with our beliefs and lifestyles, with all those sort of things. We are very well trained to provide solutions. We're good at that. but we never questioned whether like the environment that exists is compatible with those solutions. And even when we tweak these solutions to match with the ecosystems around, we can only do so at a certain degree, because we haven't invested enough in understanding what that ecosystem is. We haven't invested enough in understanding what these cultural practices are. We haven't invested enough in understanding what sets them apart or makes them different from elsewhere. I have a conviction that there is still confusion of what defines an African city. I'm yet to be challenged on that. I don't know what an African city is. I don't know what its aspect is. I don't know what its cultural identity is. I don't know. I don't know it, and I don't know if it exists. And I argue that it does not exist. You know, first from like the African part of it, but also many cities, especially large ones you have on the continent, were created for very different reasons. Were created for the exploitative practices of the colonial era back in the days. Right now, they're very confused cities because they no longer serve the primary functions they were intended for. And many of them right now are just like a mix of you know, of different activities trying to figure out how to live and coexist together, and there's a major clash that is unresolved. And without solving that problem of like urban identities, I think, you know, we don't have a strong or firm foundation to begin talking about what makes African cities. My hope lies in the fact that, you know, with the population growth over the next 30 years, we say half of the cities we're going to inhabit at a time are not even created yet. So my hope is that, you know, with all these new urban centers and cities that we are creating, there's a definition, there's a role that that urban center plays in that country's social, political, and economic system, and it's very well known. And the residents, the citizens of that city, understand their role in supporting that ecosystem to achieve them. And we do need a class of people, educated people, who have the ability and understanding on how to create a conducive environment to make that happen. So that's what I would want to see in the education system.
Thank you so much to both Catherine and Christian. I think we have a lot to process and to digest and to metabolize, just to use a metaphor that we love very much about cities. I don't know if Eugenio would like to add something to the comments.
No, just to thank you for this amazing webinar today, for the really rich content and also thoughts that we discussed. Of course, it's very hard to generalize when we think about Africa as a continent, is a world, and there is so much variety, so much complexity in it. And as in every place, I think this idea of like enhancing the local dimension of everything, of the I think the ecosystem that Christian was referring to is really important. So it's very hard to give on one side very general rules, policies that should fit in every type of context, and on the other side we know how much local culture is still so powerful, and it's a very good thing. And I think, yeah, that's why it's very hard to give tips or to suggest solutions, and every place probably has its own way. So yeah, thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you so much once again to our guests. I think that maybe we can now ask to Enrico to join us, to Marta as well, for the closing goodbyes.
Thank you. Yes, I came back. Well, also considering that this is the final webinar of the Urban Africa series, I would like to spend just 1 minute for some final remarks. I would like to thank, of course, all the participants to this webinar, our main speakers, Christian Benimana and Catherine Kalisa, but also, of course, Alice Buoli, Alessandro Frigerio, Marta Marini, and Eugenio Morello. I would like to thank as well the executive board of the Design for Development Master, my colleagues of the FACTS Research Group, and its scientific coordinator, Professor Stefano Pareglio. Finally, last but not least, the FEM staff for the help in the organization of this event. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.